possible. And we really appreciate their support and yours as well. If you're so inclined, you can visit our website to donate. This Hitchcock program is actually part of our modernist series. We have one more in this program. It's called Saving the 70s. It's coming up August 26th. That is part of our paid programming. So for $20, or you can get all three of those first on that list. For $50, they are recorded. CEU credit is available for the live program, Saving the 70s, and that will be next week. The other free programs that you see on this list are all available on our YouTube and our Facebook videos channel. This is tonight. Here we are, and I'll go into more of these photographs later. This is one of the modernist programs that we have that you can watch anytime you want, a very popular one with Darren Bradley, talking about architectural photography. We do encourage you to become a member, and there's our website. And I wanted to especially thank some of our special guests tonight. Steve Lee is joining us from the Hollywood Sound Museum. Also, here's another program that you can catch in our parts of our recorded webinars on Facebook. And our other special guest for tonight is Tom Holland, and this is his first webinar appearance. And you'll recognize some of his movies there, Psycho 2, Child's Play, and Fright Night. And we're very excited to talk to him towards the end of the program. So contact us at any time and we'd be happy to help you. And I will get into my program. Okay, so John, you have to tell me if I'm not sharing the right screen, okay?
Okay, I'll be here.
John has always got my back. All right, so I wanted to welcome everybody to my lecture. This is Alfred Hitchcock's Architecture. I have been studying this for about 4 years, and my lecture is going to be a little loose, as Hitchcock is here. I wanted to emphasize the fact that this is about historic preservation as well as Hollywood. And so one of the key ideas is how can Hollywood and historic preservationists work together to save buildings. This is what started my exploration of this topic. So tonight, mostly you'll see information from these 6 movies, and John had a poll. I think we're going to post a poll, right? So which one of these might be your favorite? I know we all have our favorites in Hitchcock. Here it comes. Which one of these might be your favorite? So John is posting a poll right now, and if you want to click on your favorite answer, and then John, maybe you could let me know which one is the favorite. I can tell you right now that mine definitely is Psycho, because Psycho is the movie that inspired me to follow this whole idea of the building as the celebrity. Oh, we got Rear Window is the winner for this one. Rope looks like it's coming behind. So as I mentioned, the building is the celebrity. So how can we use this identity of a building as a character to help create this narrative that actually saves structures? So I just want to talk a little bit about preservation, as I mentioned. This image was created for me from Jason Hart at Cube Design and Research, and I like to use it as an example of a collection of buildings, and each time that you lose one of these, you're losing the integrity of the collection. So I'd like to use architectural storytelling to connect all of those buildings. I'll go back one, because there's so many in here that are so important. As you can see, there's Richard Neutra, the VDL Research House in Los Angeles, the incredible Skidmore, Owings and Merrill Memorial Coliseum up in, I believe that's Portland, 1960. We have Bertrand Grolberg, Prentice Hospital, Cyclorama over there on the right. We have one in Florida, and a few of these are missing, as you'll see soon. So how do we do this architectural storytelling? What I was fascinated by is how pop culture can actually change the narrative of a place and have such an incredible impact that it can last for generations. So everybody's probably seen this. It's the Beatles crossing Abbey Road. The Abbey Road crosswalk is now a registered landmark in London and has been repainted multiple times, which also brings into our conversation that aspect of integrity. If you repaint it and repaint it and repaint it, it's not the actual paint that the Beatles walked across. Does it still have integrity? Does it still have significance? I think most people would say yes, because it is now a popular tourist site. The Beatles were there in 1969. So when I look at architecture and film, I like to look at how the stories have developed over time. In the top left, you'll see that's The Shining, sorry, the maze at The Shining in the Overlook Hotel. The Haunted Mansion, of course, at Disneyland is down in the bottom left, and which has an entire fan group. And I've actually really been inspired by Ridley Scott's version of the Nostromo, which is in Alien from the 1970s. In all of these, the building is actually something that motivates you as the character. So saving significant cultural resources does depend on an adaptive approach, as we know, that resonates both with the community and it motivates people to act. And you can get people to act if you said you're going to change the interior of the Haunted Mansion. You would see people act. Like there is a real allegiance to this. The inverse of this is a quote about me from 2010, which I put away and I'm going to drag out for tonight. This lady sure spends a lot of time saving ugly buildings. You know, thank goodness for the internet. So here are some of the ugly buildings that I've saved recently. This is my house in Florida, in Orlando, where I'm broadcasting from. It's a 1959 A-frame, has its own Instagram account if you want to follow it. It was abandoned for 2 years and we bought it in foreclosure for I think $205,000. Ends up, of course, it took me about 6 years to uncover the history of this house. It was designed by architect Clifford Wright, no relation to Frank Lloyd Wright. It's a 30-foot tall A-frame with 22 skylights in it, built for the Byer family. Another one of the ugly buildings that I've tried to save, a lot of you might know me from this history, is Richard Neutra's Cyclorama building at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, built for the National Park Service in 1961. I engaged in a 15-year effort to save this structure. It was I guess a sister structure to his building that he constructed at Petrified Forest in Arizona, also for the Park Service, both visitor centers for the Mission 66 program. This building had a lot of advocates fighting for it. We did engage in a federal lawsuit and won that lawsuit against the Department of Interior, but it didn't matter in the end, and the building was demolished. This was about 5 years ago. So really a sad absence in architecture at this point, especially as you've seen the Neutra Level Health House is for sale now for, I believe, $11.5 million, represented by Crosby Doe. It's in Los Angeles. These buildings are incredibly valuable. And for me to see a structure like this be demolished without acknowledging its significance was very hurtful. So I'm like, I got to figure out a way. What is the way? So here's our chart again, and you can see in the intervening years that since this chart was created, that these buildings have been demolished. Of course, we've lost the Prentice Hospital in Chicago. The Cyclorama was demolished. Marcel Breuer the building is still there. It's now an IKEA, but part of it was torn down. And then also the Riverview High School in Florida by Paul Rudolph was demolished. What's important is that we don't lose any more of these buildings. So I believe that as preservationists, we just need to get maybe a little more clever with the way that we address storytelling. So one more example before we get to Hitchcock. This is a before and after story that inspired me to develop this idea about building as character. This is the Capon House. It's in Winter Park, Florida. You can see before on the left, after on the right. You think, oh, they painted it, looks pretty good. It's actually much more than that. It was built, I believe, 1880. I was inspired to save this building, and doing the marketing is actually inspired by the Blues Brothers, and maybe more so by James Cameron. So James Cameron had actually, when he was doing his Titanic investigations, he had 2 remote robots investigating the ruin. He named one Jake and one Elwood, I guess, right? That's the 2 brothers. the two brothers of the Blues Brothers here, Jake and Elwood. He names the two robots Jake and Elwood, and one of them got stuck in the Titanic. I can't remember which one. I think it was Jake. Everybody's rooting for Jake. Poor Jake is stuck in the Titanic, and it struck me right then that by personalizing this robot, that James Cameron had actually created a character around this machine. So the story of the Capen House, it wasn't just about painting the house and preserving it. It was located on a lake in Florida, and some new owners had it removed from the historic list, paid $4 million cash, and then said they were going to tear it down. So to save the building, we actually had to chop it in half, and then we had to float it across the lake and relocate it at a museum across the lake by barge. So I'm like, how am I going to figure this out? We had to raise $400,000 in a few months, or the owners were going to tear it down Christmas week. So I got my inspiration from Fred and Ginger, because the movers told me, I said, I was very official, I had my notebook. How are we going to move this building? He said, and the mover goes, we're going to take that side and this side, we're going to move them across, and we'll spin them around, and then we're going to put them together, and it'll all be done. And I said, that's Fred and Ginger. So what we did was name each, oh, by the way, Frank Gehry also used Fred and Ginger. This is his building from 1992. In Prague, he named it himself, the Fred and Ginger building. So Fred and Ginger actually helped save the Capen House. This side is called Ginger, and the other side is called Fred. And so what we did with the press is we made a whole campaign of it. We must save Fred and Ginger. You know, Fred and Ginger need to be reunited on the other side of the lake. Fred and Ginger need to, you know, how are they going to make it? Is this house going to fall into the lake once we get it on this barge? It was really ended up being a huge event. I think we had like 4 helicopters the day that we moved this house. This is Ginger moving to the other side of the lake. And this is little Fred coming by after. As you can see, second half of Capen House comes to the museum. So what I learned from this, and here they are reunited, so romantic. The house is now being used as it was originally a single family residence. It's now being used as offices and museum space, as well as reception space for the Palacic Museum in Winter Park. It was a huge success. We ended up raising about $1 million to move and restore this building. But a lot of it was because of Hollywood. If we hadn't come up with Fred and Ginger, I'm not sure that we would have broken through sort of that press gatekeepers and had so much activity and fundraising success on that building. So now we'll get to Alfred Hitchcock. What inspired me about that was how do you, especially with Alfred Hitchcock, how do you have a historic, or a structure, it's not even historic, it's pretend. What really inspired me was the Bates Mansion, and this is from Psycho 2, which I just watched again this morning. And Tom Holland was the writer, and he's going to be joining us later. How do you create a building like this that has such a pervasive memory that people still remember this structure? This is like 60 years later since Psycho came out. People who've never even seen Psycho, who do not know who Hitchcock is, still recognize this building. So I'm thinking, how can we tap into this to bring this character to structures and then help save our historic resources? So my study of Hitchcock began with that. When you start looking at Hitchcock and architecture, you'll see that his team, which was not just him, but also his production designers, of course, screenwriters, art directors, would really use architecture to trap characters. This is in Suspicion, a 1940. Cary Grant here is carrying a glass of poisoned milk up the stairs to his wife. And you can see that there's sort of this jail-like effect created by the ribs of the skylight. Of course, this is Vertigo. You know, in Vertigo, you have this dizzying effect of the stairway, where Hitchcock is bringing you into a scene. This one is also, I think this is North by Northwest, yes, and Cary Grant is running down the hall of the 20th Century Limited, this train. In scenes like this, we become one with this film universe. I realized that I was becoming attached to these structures. I would see the structure, the train or the building as the character in the film. I wanted to mention that I did write an essay about this. I wanted to thank especially Doug Cunningham, if he's tuning in tonight. He's a professor at BYU University. He's the editor of Critical Insights. It's a book about Alfred Hitchcock for film students primarily. But he's the first one who really said, why don't you write that down and get this into a book form? And
hey,
now
Chris,
yeah.
Really quick.
Yeah.
So I think it's your microphone when you're when you're moving or something, it's going in and out. Not.
Oh, okay. I'll try to hold it like this.
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me if it's better. Better?
Yep.
Okay. See, that's why I have John there. He's always making sure that we're straight here. I'll try to talk more into the microphone. Thanks, John. So Critical Insights was an important moment because Doug said, why don't you write this down? And now I'm almost finished with my book with the University of Virginia Press, which is exploring this whole topic in depth. I'll just review just very quickly who Alfred Hitchcock was in case you're not familiar with his work. He was born in 1899 and he died in 1980. He actually was one of the most accomplished film directors of all time. He has 2 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. He never received an Oscar. He directed 53 feature films. His career spanned 6 decades, starting with the silent era in England, and he eventually became as well known as any of his actors. He really built his own brand. He's one of those first directors that built a brand around the director versus a producer or an actor. He participated with many artists such as Andy Warhol. Here they had an interview, and Salvador Dali. And he was always trying to break the box, really, and expand his art, even when he was taking chances. He took a lot of chances. He made a lot of mistakes, but he had a lot of successes as well. So from 1955 to 65, a lot of people might remember that he had a television series called Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which is actually available on Peacock.com right now, which is an NBC TV streaming channel. I wanted to acknowledge that Alfred's wife, Alma, was critical to his success, and she is, I wouldn't say his invisible partner. She read everything that he wrote, and she was very much a part of his film team. So I like to start the story. My study focuses primarily on Alfred Hitchcock in his American period when he arrived in the United States. He came across on the Queen Mary. He had a deal, movie picture deal with David Selznick. After Gone with the Wind had come out, Selznick had produced those films. The thing about Hitchcock and architecture is he actually knew a lot of architects. So Jimmy Stewart actually studied architecture and designed an airport, apparently, which I'm still looking for that plan if anybody knows where it might be. I believe it was with Princeton. And so Hitchcock actually, worked with a lot of architects. I didn't know this. I know that film people realize that there are a lot of architects in film, but architecture historians don't always know that. What I found was there were so many architects in the film industry. Robert Boyle here, who designed for Hitchcock for many years, graduated from USC. I did a whole study of the architecture graduates from USC. There were 14 graduates in, I think, 3 particular years, and together they had earned over 160 awards from, Oscars and Emmys and all of and so many commendations. So a lot of architects, especially during the Depression, went into Hollywood studios instead of private architecture firms. So, and also I wanted to just acknowledge that Dorothea Holt Redmond, she's part of that USC class of 1933. She didn't graduate in architecture, but it was fine arts. She did also work for Hitchcock, just like Boyle did. And she also worked for Walt Disney. So you might see some of her work at Disneyland and Walt Disney World, particularly in the Sleeping Beauty Castle at the Magic Kingdom. All right, so on to Hitchcock. So as we all know, if you've seen his buildings, he does have a rhythm to the way that he works his films. He does love, monuments and buildings. In Saboteur, he focuses on the Statue of Liberty. Of course, in Vertigo, he features the Golden Gate Bridge. And we have Mount Rushmore in North by Northwest. He really appreciated the American landscape. He wrote about that. He said that he was so excited to investigate all of these areas in America and to highlight those in his films. And you can see how he actually ended up changing the narrative of American architecture through his movies. Some of those motifs that he followed, if I break it up simply, would be apartments and skyscrapers, the Villains Lair, and the motel and the mansion, which engage with all of the movies I mentioned at the beginning. So we'll start with this urban honeycomb idea, apartments and skyscrapers. So everybody, or maybe you don't know this, but Hitchcock was very much into this art of observation, almost a panopticon experience where he wanted to see all and know all. And in quite a few of his movies, you'll see this, this identity of the observer, the silent observer. And that was his way of bringing you into the film. This is a little a scene from Psycho where Norman is looking through the peephole at Marion before his mother kills her in the shower. So this is very, very familiar theme. You'll see it also in Rear Window, which is a single point perspective from the position of Jimmy Stewart, who has broken his leg. He's stuck in his apartment in a heat wave, it seems like, because everybody has their windows open and he's observing everyone moving in every square. There's a couple of interesting theories and ideas about Rear Window. One of which is that each of these little windows is actually in the sort of the perspective of a movie screen, especially those ones over there on the right. This was a full-size movie set that actually had functioning apartments in it. Another place where you could see Hitchcock utilizing this idea of skyscrapers is in Rope. The two primary characters in this movie are actually murderers. They're gay lovers, which was not referenced. I did go to the Margaret Herrick Library, and you can find some very interesting information about the censorship of the characters' identities before when the movie was being produced. So they would submit the script, the censors would work it over, and then they would produce the movie. So these two characters live in the penthouse, and it's very modern. They end up killing their friend, who is then placed in that chest at the bottom, and then they place the dinner set over there and invite the friend's parents over for dinner as they're eating over the dead body. Very Hitchcockian. Here's another one, a production drawing of Scotty's apartment. This is from Vertigo. And this is where you see Hitchcock and his production team sort of dipping into the ideas of modernism, which was one of the first areas that I looked at with Hitchcock. How did he engage with modernism? And here's an actual a clip, you know, scene from that movie where you can see this sort of bachelor's pad. It's a modernist bachelor pad. A lot of these ideas actually derive from Louis Sullivan. He was one of the first modernists, American modernist. He's what you would call the father of the skyscraper. Here's the Chicago Stock Exchange that he designed in Chicago. And he had some interesting quotes about the honeycomb, the urban honeycomb, how each level would be stacked one upon the other. And you could just build those as high as you wanted, and each person would be anonymous and rendered inside of these office levels. This was actually considered a threatening position. You know, people were wondering how would they preserve their identity once you're layered up in these skyscrapers. So after Sullivan this is New York early on. So this honeycomb analogy that Sullivan came up with actually worked in Hitchcock's favor later, because he wanted to create this fear in the audience by using this identity of anonymity and skyscrapers to create a character that would sort of make you feel like maybe you were off balance, like you weren't really sure what was happening. Now, you can't really tell who is who. I just watched Invasion of the Body Snatchers again last night, the 1978 version, and that same kind of idea is there. This threatening idea of like that, you know, your personal identity is actually a threat to this community. So here's a picture of the United Nations when it was first constructed, New York City. You can see it there on the bottom left. And the difference between that building and all of New York is really remarkable, especially at that time. The reason I like to look at that one is because in North by Northwest, Hitchcock uses the United Nations as the location for murder. Of course, he would do that. Cary Grant is accidentally drawn into a spy caper. He's identified as a fictional spy that was created by the government, and then he gets involved in a long chase, and he has to basically find his own identity and discover who's doing this to him. One of the key scenes takes place at the United Nations. This is a still from the movie North by Northwest, where you can see this. This is by Harrison and Abramovitz. It's 1952. Le Corbusier was involved in it, Oscar Niemeyer. A huge team, is 39 stories. This is the Secretariat building. But the idea is that you would be rendered without your own personality. And this is usually when people say, well, what about the Fountainhead? And so here we are. So the Fountainhead is by Ayn Rand, movie, which came out in 1949, which is so much fun to watch, by the way. And there's so many great quotes about why modernism shouldn't work. Why can't we just stick with tradition? And so if you're into modernism, you'd really enjoy watching it again. In the scene on the right, he's putting up his beautiful modern structure, and they're plastering the columns on it and trying to make it neoclassical. So this is exactly what the modernists would fight against. But back to Hitchcock and the UN Secretariat, he would see, and even critics of the period or admirers of the period like Lewis Mumford said that the Secretariat had this beautiful mirrored surface that was hiding all of the stories inside. Like you never really knew what was going on inside this building. Frank Lloyd Wright called it a deadpan box that negated, you know, all emotion. So both of these identities is what Hitchcock and his team brought to North by Northwest. You know, Cary Grant goes in there and he doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know what he's going to find, and how is he going to establish his identity again. So the building plays a key part. The building, this is actually a different building. This is another structure in downtown in Manhattan, which I've forgotten the name, but it looks like the Secretariat. This was used by Saul Bass in the opening credits for North by Northwest. This linearity, this anonymity of modernism was used to immediately sort of throw you off balance. Of course, there's a scene inside the UN. The story is that Hitchcock was not allowed to film inside. Only one movie was filmed inside the building after it was completed. It was called The Glass Box, and it was also about a man trying to find his identity in urban New York. After that, they said no more filming in here. So apparently they had to sneak a camera and also some photography. This is the story that I've read in the biographers. And here's an actual picture. So you can see how they've really captured this modernist identity in North by Northwest. All right, so we'll move on to the Villains Lair, which is one of my favorite parts about Hitchcock. So all of us now, if you're watching a movie, you'll think, you know, evil people live in modernist homes. You know, the Twilight vampires even love modernism. Arthur Erickson is the architect of the structure where Bella and Edward are falling in love. Who would think vampire would live in an all glass house? Because traditionally, as you know, Dracula, etc., lived in a big castle, cobwebbed castle. And this was typical. And this really starts this idea of the building establishes the character, that where bad things happen in scary looking places. So Dracula, of course, lives in a big bad castle on the hill. This is 1931. Then we start seeing things change. If you haven't seen The Black Cat and you like Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff, you've got to watch this one. This is the first time that these two mega villains were ever paired together. It actually has nothing to do with the story by Edgar Allan Poe. Boris Karloff is a satanic Austrian architect, and Bela Lugosi is his friend. So interestingly about this, when this came out, there were many Austrian architects actually quite famous in the United States, including Richard Neutra and Rudolf Schindler. So here's an architect. He keeps the women in glass cases in his basement, and he lives in this beautiful modernist structure. This is the first time that a modern building represented the villain. This is the matte painting of his house, his modern house that the satanic architect designed for himself on top of a World War I cemetery and munitions. So inside were all the explosives. Eventually the house is blown to bits in the finale. This is the first time you see modern as a villain's lair. What Hitchcock did, though, in North by Northwest, he brought modernism back as this villain's lair. But what he did was he paired that with the identity of the villain as a very handsome and charming man. So before that, you'd see, you know, Boris Karloff was kind of a scary guy. He was not one you'd want to hang out with. But in North by Northwest, James Mason as Van Damme was quite, you know, he was charming, he was handsome, but he was evil and he was two-faced. And what they wanted to do was create a house, not only for the character and the story, which I'll explain, but also something that represented where this guy would live. So that changed everything. This guy is not living in the old castle. He's going to live in the best of the modernist places. What? She says, even Marie says, what is this house? This isn't real. It is not a real house. I get so many questions about, is this a real house? Is it really at Mount Rushmore, which is where that scene of the movie takes place? This was actually designed by Robert Boyle, the USC graduate in architecture, who had a huge career in Hollywood. These are some of the drawings that he produced for that. A lot of people say that they think that house was inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright. And I said, you know, let's look into that. Let's see if it is inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright. I never quite believe something unless I see it in writing. So I looked into it, and you can tell that, at least, you know, superficially, that it is indeed similar to Frank Lloyd Wright. And Robert Boyle said it did serve as an inspiration. This is Falling Water. This is in Pennsylvania. I think it's 1933. It's actually quite early. It was considered one of the most structurally ambitious houses of the United States at that time. And here's an interior of Falling Water on the left, and then the interior of the Van Damme house in Hitchcock's movie on the right. And you can see there are definitely similarities in the stone, the striated stone laid for the fireplace. I didn't believe it yet until I found this memo in the Margaret Herrick Library, where Hitchcock himself says to the head of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Pictures, he says, "Dear Saul, I've heard rumors to the effect that the big Frank Lloyd Wright house set on stage 6 might be used for television. I presume that this is not so, as I imagine it would be bad from a company's standpoint. Happy Christmas from Hitch." This is 1958, December 16th. And then Saul writes back, "No truth to this at all." And for this, it really proved to me that Hitchcock himself did refer to the Van Damme house as the Frank Lloyd Wright house. If you look at it, you'll see that it does appear to be Frank Lloyd Wright, but I see more of a tendency towards John Lautner. These are some production sketches. Robert Boyle, who designed the house, said that he designed the house because it had to accommodate the script, which is something I'm definitely going to ask Tom Holland when he comes on later in the program. How much does the script writer, the production designer, and the director, how much are they coordinating this when they're creating a house? Robert Boyle said that he had to create a house that had huge windows so that Cary Grant, who is represented here by the arrows, could look in on the heroine, And also that he could clamber up. You can see the arrow showing him clambering up the beams. Well, so what kind of house could accommodate that? Boyle said it had to be modern, that where you could have this kind of identity of a house as a character with the big glass windows, with these beams that you would be climbing up. And here's another picture of that, showing how these scenes would be acted out. And some of these, I don't even know where I found some of these. I've been doing this research for such a long time, but I particularly love this photo because it shows the set illuminated. And what I've heard is they don't actually put glass in all of those openings because it would reflect in the scene. Another modern building that's in North by Northwest, I just wanted to mention one that's been demolished, is the Mount Rushmore Visitor Center. When I showed you the Cyclorama Visitor Center by Richard Neutra that had also been demolished earlier, this building by Spitznagel and Associates was part of that same program, where there were 100 national parks across the country that received new modern structures for sort of the modern tourism age. Hitchcock filmed at that building. Of course, there was a murder or a fake murder at that point. But I found it interesting that he framed exactly the founding fathers in the sort of that linearity of the modern building. So we'll keep going. So once Hitchcock established this idea of the Villains Lair being a modern building, well, that just took off. Everybody it just was such a perfect fit between the handsome villain and the beautiful modernist structure that we actually just expect that today. It's almost become more than a guideline and almost a rule of cinema at this point. Body Double, which is Brian De Palma, was an homage to Rear Window. That's Jimmy Stewart in Rear Window up in the upper right. There's a building that's across the valley from this structure. So the villain lives in the Chemosphere, or I guess you'd say the victim lives in the Chemosphere. This is by John Lautner, 1960. It's owned by Benedict Taschen now. So John Lautner was an architect who actually trained under Frank Lloyd Wright and worked for him, and ended up being, I would guess you could say, really the one architect who's designed more Villains Lairs than any other in the country, because his buildings just seem to fit that character so well. The Chemosphere is indeed standing on basically a toothpick, and it has you have to go up in a funicular up to the house, up in the upper left. That's it being made fun of by The Simpsons. It's been in a lot of movies, including they rebuilt it entirely for a Charlie's Angels movie. Another building that's famous as being a Villains Lair is the Lovell Health House, which is by Richard Neutra, 1927 or 29. And the drug dealing man lives in it. This is by Curtis, is the director. And the building is still actually almost better known as the place where LA Confidential was filmed than the place that Richard Neutra designed. This, despite the fact that it is one of the most important modern structures in the United States. It was one of the first international style buildings in the country, in the United States, and it has an entirely steel frame that was erected in 40 hours. It was very innovative. So it's one of the most important buildings architecturally in the country, but most people still remember it from being in LA Confidential. So this goes back to that idea of public memory. The other thing I just fit these in here is with Frank Lloyd Wright. This is the building that he did. This is, I forget the name of this house. I missed it on this slide, but this is in Los Angeles. And I'm sure, it's Sturgis House in LA. I was gonna say somebody probably put that in the chat. I think this looks a lot like the building in North by Northwest, with this ridiculous cantilever where it's just hanging over the cliff. Like, you could just imagine a villain living in this building. Here's another Lautner, which ended up being a Villains Lair as well. So this one was in Diamonds Are Forever, which is a James Bond film. Ken Adam was actually a very prolific production designer for the James Bond films, and he adopted a lot of that modernist architectural idiom to represent character. in the movies, and especially modernism. This is the Elrod House. It's in Palm Springs. I was actually lucky enough to go there once, and it's just an incredible place. But regular people don't live here, so this is definitely a villain's lair. And here, and who could miss who could miss all this in the James Bond movies? There's one more. There's yet another Lautner building that is also considered a villain's lair, and this is the Sheetz Goldstein house. This is the owner. He's donated this to LACMA, this building to LACMA, but you can visit it on occasion. I was lucky enough to go there too. Most people actually know it as the place where The Big Lebowski was filmed. So if in terms of preservation, if I was going to approach somebody who was in the public who didn't really know who John Lautner was or why Frank Lloyd Wright is important, I might say, you know, it's the house where The Big Lebowski was filmed and the dude was resting on the couch. Everyone says, oh, I know that house. So this is how you can use this sort of Hollywood shortcut to get people to understand a historic structure that has a much more complicated history. Here's Blade Runner. Ridley Scott filmed part of this in the Ennis House, Frank Lloyd Wright's house up in the hills, 1923, which, by the way, also filmed at the Bradbury Building in downtown LA. And if you go to the Bradbury Building, everyone says, oh, this is from Blade Runner. Instead of really acknowledging what the actual history is. But the important thing is it's just an opening for you to get the message across. Oh, here's one more beautiful picture of the Level Health House. Which, by the way, yes, is for sale right now after 60 years of continuous ownership by the Topper family. Okay, but this is the last one. This is my favorite, actually, the motel and the mansion. So when we're talking about Hitchcock and we're talking about hotels, we're not really thinking about Palm Springs, right? It's more of a roadside experience. You're driving all day, it's getting kind of dark, it's raining, and you see the neon lights. You're thinking, I just need to stop at a roadside place. You know, take a shower, nice place to rest, or maybe not. So this movie was such a shocker when it came out. And I did actually, my mom talked about it once. She said after she saw it, she just couldn't take a shower for years. The incredible thing about this, it just wasn't about the buildings. Hitchcock engaged in an entirely new publicity effort where you were not allowed to enter the theater after the movie started. So when the movie came out in 1959, 1960, right in there, you could just go in the movie theater anytime and people would sit through and then they'd watch the beginning, they'd watch the end and then they'd watch the beginning and then they'd kind of get in and out. It was no big deal. Hitchcock didn't want that. It was wrecking his art. So he said, there's no way, and plus he killed the heroine 20 minutes in. He says, there's no way you can come into the theater after it starts. Well, that just made everyone crazy. And it made the movie a huge sea change, really, in the way people saw movies. But what's important to us is this, is the identity of the architecture in Psycho. The story is based upon a real story of Ed Gein, who was a serial killer that lived in Plainfield, Wisconsin, I believe. This was his actual house, which was featured in Life magazine. He was killed many people. This is his real mother's room. He was a man, a bachelor, who kept his mother's room exactly as it was, which is similar to the story in Psycho. What I was curious about, Robert Bloch the author, wrote a novel about Ed Gein. He didn't use this identity of the farmhouse. Instead, he put Ed Gein or not Ed Gein, he called him Norman Bates, in a big Victorian mansion and a motel down below. And Robert Bloch said he created the motel as a character because Norman Bates needed someplace where the victims would be coming in and out. What's interesting is that Hitchcock saw this and his team saw this, and they said that they loved the idea of this vertical and this horizontal together. It's very cinematic pairing. The way I look at it is that in 1959-60, when this came out, both the Victorian mansion and the roadside motel were actually being demolished all over the country. Anyone who's a little bit older than then the millennials remembers when Victorian mansions were being torn down all the time. 1970s, 1980s, they're just old and they're being demolished. Same with the old motels. So Hitchcock and his team were tapping into this identity of this forlorn experience. So here he is pointing at his mansion. I'll just go a little quicker because I want to get to our other guest. So the motel, started in California in the 1930s. It was seen as a safer place to stay versus these downtown hotels. What's interesting is that the idea of the big mansion and then the hotel behind it, the little motel behind it, was really quite popular in that period, where the big house would be seen, used to be a sort of a lodging house. Then they would build a little motel out front. So you can find these postcards all over that have this exact same composition of structure. You can see this one's called the Tourist Court. The motels actually became very dangerous places to stay. This is J. Edgar Hoover. He had an article called Camps of Crime, where he said that motels were the new home of crime in America: disease, bribery, corruption, crookedness, rape, white slavery, thievery, and murder. So when you get to the Bates Motel over here in Psycho, this is the kind of identity we're looking at. It's not a place that you want to shelter. It's a place that you should be afraid of. So right away, the team is setting us up with this idea. You're not going to Holiday Inn when you're entering Hitchcock's universe. And here's what we ended up with. I remember driving across the country in the 90s, and I could still stay at quite a few of these motels, but they're really all gone. So this idea of architectural identity, I wanted to show you all a couple of these fun photos. The one on the right is kind of, I guess, a rare photo of Anthony Perkins, basically a serial killer, posing for a fashion shoot in front of his crazy mom's house for 17 magazine, which I thought was so ironic. And just some fun, interesting photos of the set of the Bates Mansion. So you can see it really was just the front, at least at one point. A lot of people say, I'm going to ask our friend Steve Lee, who's coming up next, about this. A lot of people say the mansion was inspired by a house by the railroad, painting by Edward Hopper from 1925, or that it's actually part of the Colonial Street, the Harvey House. Here it says the Allison House, but it's also known as the Harvey House. But it couldn't have been the Harvey House. The Harvey House was also behind James Stewart in his, that's why it's called the Harvey House. But I've seen this house in the Rockford Files. This is a clip from the Rockford Files. So people think that this house was moved to create the Bates Mansion, and that it couldn't be because the two houses existed at the same time. Just very quickly, the inspiration, I think, for the Bates Mansion, the identity of it, probably came, I saw a lot of references to Charles Addams' work. Before he created the Addams Family show, he had a series of cartoons, and you can see he used that Second Empire revival with the mansard roof. You can see Hitchcock used it himself. Another thing I was investigating is that where did the production designers actually live, and what real buildings might have impacted their identification of the Bates Mansion. So Joseph Hurley was one of the art directors, and this was where he lived in 1940, which is a good deal before Psycho came out, but he was very close to downtown. What was happening in downtown LA in the late 1950s was a wholesale demolition of all the Victorian mansions that used to house the millionaires, the millionaire businessmen of downtown LA. So downtown LA used to be Victorian. All of these buildings went through a period of being used as hotels and rooming houses, and then they were demolished for a gigantic, a rehabilitation into art center. This Melrose Hotel, this is an actual picture of the resident of the Melrose Hotel, and I think the interior of this building looks so much like the interior of the Bates Mansion, and the little lady just reminds me maybe of Mrs. Bates. A little bit. This was in the newspaper at the time. And then here's just a couple pictures of those mansions. They just represented the end of an era. And you can see Union Bank, which I believe has recently been listed on the National Register. And they moved all of these buildings away while creating the new art center. That's the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in the background. And this is what the neighborhood looks like today. And here is where Frank Gehry's building is now, the Disney Hall, where those mansions used to be. So just to close up, the longevity of Hitchcock's vision, you can see it because everybody recognizes things like the Bates Mansion. This was a exhibit at the, I believe it's at the Met in New York. Phantom Manor, a Disney ride, a Disney version of Haunted Mansion in France, in Paris. Looks like this, like the Bates Mansion. And something you might look into if you're interested in this topic further until my book comes out is The Wrong House, The Architecture of Alfred Hitchcock by Stephen Jacobs, a really comprehensive and beautifully done book that gives you, where he reconstructed blueprints and histories of all of the buildings in Hitchcock's movies. So this idea comes of architecture as identity, it comes way back from the beginning of Western storytelling, where you have like the Minotaur and the maze. And then here you see Jack Torrance looking at the maze. You know, even the Overlook Hotel in a way is like the Minotaur wandering around the hotel. I want to mention that in Georgetown, these are the steps from The Exorcist, which are actually called, the filmmakers called these the Hitchcock Steps in honor of Alfred Hitchcock and his work in Psycho. So this idea of architecture through movies is so pervasive, and actually The Exorcist Steps has its own plaque. Even though it only appeared in this movie for a few minutes and they've been there for such a long time, they're most famous for this very short exposure in terms of their cultural longevity. And then here are the authors and the director on the steps. And okay, so here we go. I'm going to close it out. So you can see it even today. Matthew Weiner in Mad Men used a lot of this visions of Cary Grant in his Mad Men. And then North by Northwest is still famous at Mount Rushmore, this building that's now been demolished. Those are just some photos. One interesting, there's two more interesting things. Okay, so the Vertigo, which you can see here in a little clip, was actually so popular that the owners completely and basically disfigured it to stop people from visiting. It was such a popular tourist site for fans. And then the last thing is this building from the Birds, the schoolhouse from the Birds, was actually abandoned when Hitchcock's team found it. It was going to be demolished. And in some sense, they saved that building because after it was featured in that movie, people now go and they do this sort of recreation of their own experience of the Birds. I just thought these kids were funny. So in a way that the Birds actually saved this historic structure. So now it's regarded as a place, as a place of pilgrimage rather than a place to be demolished. So I wanted to take this just real quick. I'm going to introduce my friend Steve Lee. John, if you want to get Steve kind of queued up. Steve is with the Hollywood Sound Museum, and he is going to just talk with me for a few minutes about some of these sounds and some of this identity of how we can create these sounds that were so special for Hitchcock.
How are you, Chris?
Hi, how are you?
That was brilliant. That was brilliant. I learned a lot from that.
John, you're going to have to help us out because I'm not going to be able to read the chat.
I'm tracking them all, so.
Okay, is my sound better? I'm sorry about that sound problem. It's this hair.
No, it got better. It was much more clear after you put it closer there.
Okay,
We lost you briefly a few moments, but it wasn't very long, just for a moment or two. But everything's good.
Well, Steve, you have a couple stories that you're going to share about sound and Hitchcock. Can you tell us a little bit about the Sound Museum?
Oh, yeah. Well, I've been in post sound for films for almost 30 years. Mm-hmm. And it's scary to say because I'm not that old. But I'm sort of semi-retired now, but I realized just a few years ago that there wasn't really a place that harvested all this knowledge about entertainment audio. And mm-hmm. there wasn't a place to go to. I mean, there are like the guilds and like the Grammy Museum and things like that, but nothing really dealt with like film sound or entertainment audio. So mm-hmm. We're in the process of creating a nonprofit to build the Hollywood Sound Museum. And unfortunately this year with COVID and everything, our plans are kind of delayed again. But we're starting an online presence now, and we're going to be having a series of webinars like this and a bunch of other stuff. And I've been collecting all sorts of assets for the museum, a bunch of sound libraries from various famous collections.
There's tell me about what's behind your shoulder there. What do you got there?
These guys.
Those guys.
Yes. One of the people on the board is my dear friend Lisa Varney, and her father was Bill Varney, who is a very famous post re-recording mixer, and he won 2 Oscars in his career, and these are they for a little movie called Raiders of the Lost Ark and another one called The Empire Strikes Back. And Bill passed away a few years ago, but his daughter, who's a dear friend of mine, pledged these to the museum, so we have them in our collection.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So can you just tell me a little bit about what was that instrument that Hitchcock was looking at in that?
The Triptonium. Yeah, the Triptonium. It's a German instrument. It was built around the 1930s, around in there. It was actually quite popular in Nazi Germany. They actually had lots of concerts featuring the Triptonium. It's actually one of the first synthesizers. And all the sounds, well, not all the sounds, about 90% of the sounds of the birds in the birds are the Triptonium. It sort of gave him that sort of weird, sort of otherworldly kind of sound. All those squawks were synth. They were manufactured on that thing. And they used real like bird flaps and other sounds too. And there's some real bird sounds. But yeah, it's mostly the Triptonium, performed by a guy named Oscar Sala. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
We have a question already. Does the museum have the Wilhelm scream?
I would dare say I am the reason that whoever commented knows about the Wilhelm scream. I'll tell you the story very quickly. My friend and mentor was Ben Burtt, who was the Star Wars sound effects designer. He made all those wonderful sounds like R2-D2 and Chewbacca and all those things. And when we were corresponding way back in the late 70s, early 80s, we were trading knowledge about sound effects that got used over and over. And both of us, while growing up, heard this scream on TV and movies being used over and over. And so we sort of pooled our resources, and I started a list. In the mid to late 90s, I put that list on the internet, and Pandora's box was broken. It's in all the Star Wars films, it's in all the Indiana Jones films, so that's how a lot of people came to notice it. And then I wrote this list with over 200 200 uses. Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks, John. Appreciate it. John's having fun. But anyway, I don't want to take away from the subject of the evening. But basically, yeah, the Wilhelm scream. That's it. It has a big cult following, and I'm afraid I'm the one.
Really?
Ben started using it as sort of a personal sound signature in all of his films, and then I pushed the use of it when I worked with a friend of his that he went to school with, and I put it in all the films I worked in. It's in like all of Joe Dante's movies. We put it in all of Quentin Tarantino's movies. It's in Lord of the Rings. I basically created this monster, and I felt really bad because this was Ben's little thing. And he basically accused me of starting a cult.
You never know what's going to take off.
Yes,
That's
but to answer this person's question, yes, the Wilhelm will be represented in the museum. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So I need to ask you this. You know, I've been wanting to get you on
yes, please.
Recorded with this answer. So the Bates Mansion on the Hill and the Harvey House are not the same building. Is this right?
I didn't have time to send you the picture, but I wanted to show you. I was on the lot about a year ago, and I don't know how well we can see that.
See you.
That's me. That's me on the porch of the Harvey House.
Right. So these
on
are
Colonial
the same
Street.
house.
They are completely different houses. Yeah. No, I remember growing up watching all that Universal, all the Universal TV shows, the single camera TV shows like Rockford Files and all that stuff. And they would shoot, entirely on the lot. They didn't have to go anywhere. And Colonial Street was like, the everyday, street. And the Colonial, all those houses are just so distinct looking. And it does look a lot like the Psycho House, but no, they're completely separate. And it's right next door to the Munster House also.
Okay, so anyone who's not who's new to this conversation, this is like a big internet rumor that
Yeah.
the Harvey House
Oh.
was taken apart to create the Bates Mansion, and I
Don't
want to just get it on the record that
don't
it's
get me
not.
started about the
I know.
internet.
I
There's
know,
so
right?
much stuff. Yeah.
So yeah, so Steve, tell me something. So there's a famous story about Hitchcock saying with sound that only a Catalba melon, I think, was the right one for the stabbing in Psycho.
Yeah. I from what I hear, a lot of that stuff is shrouded in mystery. But yeah, a lot of the stabbing. It's interesting how if you listen to that sequence, if you try to focus on just the soundtrack, it's mostly just a musical sequence. That's the predominant thing in it because that score is so powerful. And there are screams, of course, but even they are mixed down. It's the strings, it's the music. But yeah, I believe there was some kind of melon that they used to stab. And I don't know whether that was cut to picture or if it was performed in sync to Foley. But yeah, it was there's some really good Foley in that film. I was listening to, again, the little subtle footsteps and stuff like that. I was really always impressed with Simon Oakland's speech at the end of Psycho when he's basically telling you what happened over the course of the whole film. This one long, expository scene. And they put in his footsteps. I mean, it was added later because they were concentrating on the dialogue, which is what the production recordist does. But there's some great little sound moments, but it's very subtle. And back in the day, they couldn't really hold much in the soundtrack because it was optical film. And, with the advent of Dolby Stereo and then later digital, you could fit more. That's how, films got louder. But back then it was very, very subtle. But there's some great little tasty sound moments.
Can you explain what Foley, what a Foley room is
Foley,
for people who might not know?
It gets misconstrued by a lot of people. It's sort of like a generic sound term. Foley is specifically performance-based sound effects like footsteps and cloth movement that they have to record in sync to picture. They're very subtle, like movements of people and things like that. If they weren't there, you would notice something's off. So they have to put them back in because the production recordist on the set, he or she is concentrated just on the words, just the dialogue. So they don't usually get all this movement. So it has to be put in later. Also, if they do a foreign version of the film, anything that's recorded by the production mixer is just gone. So they have to put in all the footsteps. And they found the easiest way to do it. A guy named Jack Foley basically pioneered the technology, and that's why it's named for him. Just, they put up the film and record him in sync to picture performing all this stuff. And it really makes an indigenous performance sound-wise. It's very specific to whatever film you're watching.
John, I see you have a question. I can tell by your face.
I have two questions, but
yes, John.
One and you can take the other, Chris.
Okay.
So there was a question from Denise. The sound of the playground and the birds was brilliant, akin to the creaking floorboard or staircase. Do you know how that was created, and do you know any other stories about that?
Well, I don't know specifically, but it's interesting. Creaking wood. One of my heroes is a guy named Jimmy McDonald. He was the sound guy at Disney, and he was very famous for making props that would make the sound. If Walt Disney said to him, "We need the sound of this," he would manufacture something that could be performed and to make that sound so they could control it on the stage. And he had a lot of creaking wood things that were sort of these rubbery devices that he could control and creak and like turn a knob to make that sort of thing and perform it specifically for the moment. So it might have been something like that. I've recorded floorboard creaks and things like that. In fact, I got one of the first films in my professional career, I got sound effects in. It was The Princess Bride. And the creaks on the ship early in the film were, I was house sitting a friend's house in West Hollywood at the time. And there was like a couple spots in her hardwood floor that if you stepped on it, all right. So I actually recorded, real floorboard creaks, but yeah, it could have been a prop that they could have performed to picture. So I'll have to re-listen to that with that in mind.
I got one more sound question here. I just lost it. It went up there.
Uh-oh.
Where'd it go? Okay. What influence did Edgar Varese have with movie music and sounds? Varese. I don't know.
I'm
we're going to have to do some research.
I know. I'm eager to. That's the fun thing about this museum. is I don't know everything. I don't pretend to, but it's fascinating going into the research and finding all this stuff. Some great people have donated their sound libraries and their collections. Anne Kroeber, who was the widow of the great Alan Splett, who was a very famous sound designer who worked with David Lynch. We have his entire library, and I'm just slowly going through it. There's some amazing stuff from like Elephant Man, and he won an Oscar for The Black Stallion. There's some fantastic stuff. And David Udall's library, who did Christine and The Thing, the John Carpenter remake of The Thing. I'm just learning so much just going through these. So I'm really excited to make some of this stuff available and share the knowledge. That's one of my mantras, is share the craft.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. So let's see. Did you have another question, John, about sound? I'm going to answer a question while John's looking through the chat. There's a lot of questions in there. But
I have an interesting question from Salvador.
Okay.
He's asking if you know anything about the Tarzan scream.
Yeah, Ben Bird actually recreated it. He took it upon himself and found a way to recreate it. It was actual vocals, but they were like edited in a very specific way. And it's interesting how one of the versions, there are actually a couple different versions. There's the Johnny Weissmuller one. Yeah, Johnny Weissmuller actually did one himself vocally, which was really impressive. But there's another one that was mostly on the TV show that was sort of manufactured. It was sort of editorially made. And there's something very interesting about that sound. It's a palindrome. It's a sound palindrome. It plays exactly the same backwards as forwards. Which is really fascinating. I found that out when I was working on Princess Bride, because we snuck a, well, actually, I don't think very many people know this, so I'm actually breaking this. There's a Tarzan yell way in the background of the fire swamp in Princess Bride.
So I have one more here. So can you just do, someone says, talk a bit about the sound, Brian asked about the sound on Touch of Evil, which is the Orson Welles film, which by the way came out right before Psycho, and also had, you know, Stardom Motel. And
the fascinating thing about the Touch of Evil is the whole opening sequence that they actually recreated not that long ago, like in the last 15 years or so. Walter Murch, who is a brilliant sound designer, he worked with Coppola on like Apocalypse Now and all that sort of thing. He's like one of the founding fathers of sound design as we consider it today. He recreated from Orson's notes that whole opening sequence. It was cut out by the studio, where the car, it's like one long tracking shot of that car coming in to that Cuban town, and the music changes as the car moves. You follow it through, and basically it starts with somebody putting a bomb in the trunk of this car, and it's this suspenseful thing where you follow this car and you're waiting for something to happen. Like, is the car going to explode? Is somebody going to die? But it goes through so many different environments, and Orson Welles had some very specific notes about how he wanted it to sound. And I don't know whether the studio said, whatever, we don't need it. They cut it out and turned it into a credit sequence and basically ruined what he wanted to do. But Murch and a bunch of other people took it upon themselves, and they basically created that whole sequence the way he intended it. And it's just brilliant.
That's great. I have a closing question for you.
Okay.
Are there any good films or videos about the use of music and Foley in film, which I think you recommended?
Yeah, there are a couple documentaries right now. There's a great one. It's streaming on Amazon Prime right now. My dear friend Midge Costin wrote and directed it, called Making Waves, The Art of Cinematic Sound. And they talk a bit about Foley in there too, and they talk about music. It's basically the whole sound process. So I highly recommend that. There's also one specifically on Foley. I think it's called The Actors of Sound. Oh, and that can also be found out there on one of the streaming services. It's quite good also.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us. Where can everybody get in touch with you?
If you go to the hollywoodsoundmuseum.org, you'll be able to find me. And we're having a promotion right now, or a fundraiser. We're selling this wonderful Halloween T-shirt. I don't know. I think you have you were showing a picture.
I showed the skeleton.
The logo.
On it.
It's sort of three sort of like Grateful Dead skeletons holding boom microphones.
Holding
it's
the booms.
Really cute.
Yeah, it's cute.
Yeah. So if you go to hollywoodsoundmuseum.org and scroll down, there's a little link to buy the T-shirt. It's also on our Facebook page. If you search Hollywood Sound Museum on Facebook.
Great.
You'll find us. And we're going to be starting webinars soon. You guys are going to be helping us
Wonderful.
out. We're going to be doing that real soon. Yeah, well, hey, you're going to be a part of it.
We're experts now.
Yeah, no, so we're going to have some exciting stuff. So please,
Yeah.
check out the site and send me a note, and we'll get you involved. We just want to share the craft.
All right. Well, we'll catch you later. Thanks so
Thank you.
much, Steve, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. And now, John, we are going to bring in our friend Tom Holland. I'm going to answer a question while John is getting Tom queued up. There he is. That was fast. Hey, Tom. How are you?
How you doing? How you doing?
This is wonderful. Thank you for joining us.
Well, my pleasure to be here. I was just listening.
Yeah. Did you enjoy that?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I always think that I would be terrific at trivia, and I listen to these things and I realize I'd lose hands down. Yeah. I'm looking at the comments along the side. I mean,
isn't that fun?
well, the people who are listening are also very, very knowledgeable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, everyone has really been looking forward to seeing you today. And if anyone is not familiar with Tom's work, the reason that he's joining us in particular is he's the writer for Psycho 2. And also, were you the writer for Fright Night as well? And then also Child's Play?
Yes, I was.
Yes, classics, some of our favorites.
and a number of them before that. But yes.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, just to open it up, anyone, if you have questions, this is your moment. So if you want to post some questions for Tom. But Tom, I wanted to ask you in particular, what is the, how did you write, when you wrote Psycho 2, so it came out quite a bit later than the original. Do you want to just tell us real quick why the sequel came out so much later than the original?
It was 21 years later, and people did not do sequels then. They were, Psycho 2 started out being a cable movie. And this is just when cable is coming in. We're talking 1982. And it was Oak Communications down in San Diego. They're listed as a producer on there. And it's a long story, Chris. But I mean, it essentially I had to write a script. It was a cable movie. The director and I, Richard Franklin, knew we could elevate it if we could get Tony Perkins back to play Norman. So much of that script was one eye on enticing Tony to come back. And Universal didn't realize what they had. And then they put out a publicity release that Norman was coming home, and the entire world went crazy, and we got elevated to being a feature film. And that was the beginning of the whole Psycho legacy, which has gone on now for, oh my God, 30 years.
Here we go. I was on mute. So I was going to ask you. I know, I scared you. Sorry. Oh, that's great. I scared Tom Holland. That should actually be a badge of honor. Anyway, I was going to just ask you, I saw something you wrote that you reconstructed the Bates Mansion, and then I saw something else that said it had still existed. You only reconstructed the motel. Can you tell us how that worked?
Oh, no. We reconstructed the mansion and the hotel. Mm-hmm. We put it up in the hill. There was no Psycho house standing for 21 years until we rebuilt it. Mm-hmm. And we framed the hotel down below so you get that upshot past the hotel and the looming house and mother in the second floor window. And that was just the beginning of Universal opening their theme park. And that was the first time I think that we had to stop and shut down when we were shooting for the little electronic carts to come through because they were selling tours of the studio for the first time.
Right. I went on one of those in the 70s when I was a kid.
Okay.
Yeah, it was fun. So when you reconstructed did you have plans to reconstruct those things?
Well,
the house and the motel?
Yeah, what happened was, what was it, Tony Boyle, Bob Boyle?
Yeah, Robert Boyle. Mm-hmm.
Robert Boyle. Bob Boyle took myself and Richard Franklin over to the production facilities at Universal, and in this huge room, they had all the sets going back to, I don't know how far, but I'd say back at least into the 30s. And he pulled out the original drawings, architectural drawings for the Psycho house from the 1961 original.
Wow.
And that's what we used. On the set, we added some rooms, but that is an exact replication of the house from 1961.
Well, that's what I'm wondering, and this will be mostly for the real Psycho fans out there like myself who've seen every manifestation of that. I read that is the production designer was named Corso, is that right? Who worked with
John
you?
Corso, yes, he was
Corso.
very good.
He
Yeah.
had to recreate areas that were not in the original Psycho, like the kitchen, where Norman Bates spends a good amount of time. So what I've found happened is that you see that kitchen actually becomes its own identity as well, and is reproduced in every Psycho movie after that.
That's
so
amazing.
It's based on his design.
I wasn't aware of that. I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, so you see it again and again. So I just thought that was interesting. I just wondered, when you are writing a script, how do you write a building in? I'm even thinking in Fright Night, the building does play a character. Obviously in Psycho 2, it's a main character. And even in Child's Play, you know, the building has a little bit to do with it when they're in that apartment. So how do you write that as a screenwriter? How do you create a character, the storytelling?
Well, it changes story to story, but Psycho, obviously, that house was the one sheet. It's the looming image, you know, and you could tell how Hitchcock had set up the motel down below with the house up above to tie them in and to make the house seem more threatening. So, Fright Night, there's a tradition of Victorian gingerbread houses in horror movies, you know, and usually what they are, the idea was when people first moved out of the cities and had some money, they bought estates and they put up a big house. And then as the decades went by, the land was sold off and a neighborhood grew up around it. That's sort of the idea behind the house in Fright Night. But I don't know if that's architectural or sociological. But and when you go to Child's Play, you're looking for production value. If you're going to a city like Chicago, you damn well better shoot it. And that building where Karen Barkley and the boy lived was the most. It was like out of the, maybe even out of the 20s. I don't remember now, but it's a well-known building architecturally, and it was just very, very interesting. So you use architecture in movies both to help the story, but also to make some production statements. It makes your film look bigger, you know. But everything's about framing shots, you know, and what you see through there. So architecture becomes incredibly important, and you see that in all of Hitchcock's movies. You know,
definitely. Like, do you tend to use, like, you know, framing, like doorways, window frames, doorknobs, that kind of thing, the same way
all the time. So I mean, even the fixtures, as you said, become important. Psycho 2, Tony looks at the doorknob to his mother's room, and he flashes back to when he was a little boy, seeing himself in the reflection of the copper doorknob. So yes. But, you know, doorway, depth in frame is important. In other words, if you're in a room, as opposed to shooting a blank wall or shooting two walls with nothing there, it's better if you can shoot a wall with a doorway and have the doorway half open. It's just more interesting. You know, if you're looking to, no set designer wants to build 4 flat walls. If you look at apartments and movies, you'll see that there's a sense that there are other rooms and surroundings and everything.
There's a movement to it.
Yes.
Let me see, I have some more questions for you. So, why do you think that certain types of buildings inspire fear? So I talked about the Villains Lair, you know, using a modernist structure. to house a handsome villain. Like you just said, the Victorian is where, you know, your
Rosemary's
vampires
Baby.
Oh
Rosemary's
yeah,
Baby
yeah,
with the
Rosemary's
Dakota.
Baby.
With the Dakota.
The
One of the most
Dakota's
famous.
just scary looking.
Well, one of the most, it's where John Lennon passed away. But I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, so I mean, your eye, if you're looking for production value in something on the screen that's interesting, that holds the eye as well as the audience with the story, you want buildings that are architecturally interesting. And usually when you're into horror, that's older buildings. But I think you're also seeing more and more modernist architecture in movies. You're seeing more and more steel, glass, stone, clean
I see a lot of
line.
that. The Blumhouse, a lot of the Blumhouse pictures, Invisible
There
Man.
you go. There you go. So these,
Boy Nail had the villain was in a pure modernist structure.
so people are looking at, you know, at ways to stay modern as opposed to being in the 80s. I mean, I just got through, I don't know where, but you know, Fright Night and Child's Play are praised for being, you know, great 80s movies. I'd never thought of it that way, but everything also has its style and time. I mean, if you go back and look at style in movies, you're back in the 30s when everything was, you know, satin and, you know, the buildings, everything was modern. I don't know how you put it, but the great MGM movies, they art directed the hell out of them. It's fascinating. I could sit and listen to where are you, Steve? Well, Steve's left.
Yeah, nope, he's in there. He's up in there. He's just hiding.
Well, but I mean, I could have sat and listened because he has much more detail than I do. Well, about sound he does. I'm sure you do about architecture.
No, this is, I really enjoyed, I have another question about Psycho to ask you actually about Psycho too, because it just occurred to me. I watched it again this morning. So, you know, Norman comes back to the Bates Motel and he's painting it yellow. So who came up with the yellow color for the motel? When obviously it had been black and white originally. What did you, I mean, who came up with the idea for the yellow?
I have no idea.
It seems to me like it's supposed to represent hope or something.
I remember the shot of he looks up at the house and in shock. He drops the paintbrush, and that's an insert. There must have been an art direction reason for yellow, but I don't know. Was it originally yellow?
That's what I'm saying. Who would know? We don't know because I don't have a record of that. If anybody has a record of what the motel, you know,
that's a Bob Boyle question, but unfortunately he's no longer with us. He did all of Hitchcock's movies up until.
There's Steve again. Steve is joining us again, Tom. So
hi,
we
Tom.
can all have a chat.
Hi there.
No, I wanted to say hi briefly because I love your work so much. So
thank you. I was just talking about Bob Boyle, like one of the 3 or 4 classic, you know, production designers. He did every Hitchcock movie through, I don't know. I mean, right up to the end. And then he went on and he did all of Clint Eastwood movies. And he finally passed away about 4 or 5 years ago doing a Clint Eastwood movie, but he did all of them. So I mean, you know,
that's great stuff.
You know what I found was interesting too is your production designer on Psycho 2, Corso, also did. He did his production design on Breakfast Club, Pretty in Pink. He did Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which has obviously an architectural bent.
Okay, I'll tell you why. Because Hilton Green was the producer of Psycho 2. He was Hitchcock's first AD on Psycho.
Wow.
And John Corso did a good job on Psycho 2, and Hilton went on to produce the early movies of the Brat Pack, John Hughes.
John Hughes, all those.
So John Corso followed Hilton Green as producer from the Psycho movies to John Hughes.
That makes sense. Well, you know, but you can see that art kind of, you know, I'm always been interested that production designers, obviously they use architecture, but some like, you know, the Breakfast Club, for instance, that John Corso was production designer on, takes place in that one library almost entirely. You know, so that's where I would think, you know, that architecture is actually, you know, pretty prominent.
Which was built inside a gymnasium, I understand, actually.
Really?
Yeah, it was. It wasn't actually a library, I believe. You'll have to double check this, but I believe it was. Yeah.
There's so many stories.
Yeah.
So, John, did we have any more questions come in yet? I have a couple more that I want to ask, but I want to make sure that we give anybody a chance because Tom, apparently this is one of your first webinars. I'm so excited you could join us.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I was terrified of being able to get the sound working, actually. Yeah.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here. So let me ask you what are the kind of projects that you're working on right now? You have a website I was checking out.
I have TH Terror Time, which is horror news, but I also have a store on it for if you want signed scripts and, you know, and all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And I have my first novel published called The Notch, and it's on Amazon, and Cemetery Dance was the publisher, and that's been doing very, very well. I was very, very pleased with the reviews, especially the trade publications like Booklist, but it was published right in the teeth of COVID.
Oh, no.
And so none of the independent bookstores were open, nor none of the publishers. But anyway, so it's been a lot.
Yeah, we put your URL for your website in the chat box, so everybody.
Oh well, thank you. I just had my first collection of short stories go up today on Kindle on Amazon.
Oh, wonderful.
Called Domestic Disturbances. So good. I mean, what I'm doing is I'm very busy writing. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like Steve is still totally immersed in sound. You know, I mean. You know,
it's in our blood.
Well, it's in our blood, but I think also these times may have pushed us to be more productive in our favorite areas than ordinarily.
Well, we're finding more ways to express ourselves and get the information out there through the internet and other ways.
Well, this is amazing. We're sitting here doing this, you know.
Well, I definitely want to get you on one of my webinars too. We're going to be starting that up very soon. So we'll talk, man.
As long as I can get over the terror of getting the sound working.
Oh, trust me, I'm with you. I'm not a tech guy. People think I am, but I'm not.
So, Tom, is that a little Chucky over there right next to your shoulder, on your left shoulder? I see like a little Chucky in the background.
Is there?
Right there on
the
desk.
wall.
Oh yeah, that's a thing they used in the lobby of the theaters, but it's the cutout without the sign it goes into. And I've had it for years, and I've never known what to do with it.
That's a good spot for it. That little Chucky is pretty scary. Do you think that have you ever seen any of the Annabelle movies? Do you think Annabelle kind of comes from the Chucky legacy?
Yes, but I can't tell you I'm well versed in the world. No.
It seems like people are still scared of funny little dolls that run around with knives. Anyway.
Well, terrifying.
I don't remember that before Child's Play, but maybe.
No, I think you started it.
Well, there was the Twilight Zone episode with the
right.
Tina. Well, that's the doll he falls over down the stairs.
Yeah, Telly Savalas.
Tiny Tina.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Tiny Tina.
Talking Tina.
Talking Tina. Well, I'll give you another one.
Mm-hmm.
Oh God, Karen Black.
Right.
1968 trilogy of terror, written by Richard Matheson and directed by. Anyway, they had one of those episodes was called Prey, and it was about a doll, about a Zumi doll, and it was about 1.5 feet tall.
I remember.
And do you remember that one? You could never get it on TV again.
It was all teeth. It was all teeth. It was like this round head.
And he had a spear. And he chased Karen Black around the apartment, stabbing her in the ankles. And
I remember that.
Okay, and it was terrifying. And what the director did was he put the camera on a pair of roller skates, and he chased after her 2 or 3 inches off the floor with a wide-angle lens, and it worked. Just worked great. Nobody remembered it, but that's why I did Child's Play. Because I wanted to have that moving doll point of view chasing Karen and the kid around the apartment. All these things. But everybody influences everybody else.
Yeah, no, this exactly. I was just typing in the chat about Robert Boyle because somebody was wondering about his name. Did we have any more questions, John, that I missed up in here? I think we're coming to the conclusion. So
Okay.
yeah, I wanted to thank you both, Steve, and especially you, Tom, for stepping out and getting on a
My
webinar. This
pleasure.
has been
My
really
pleasure.
fun. I'd love to talk to you some more about all production design and how architecture and how we can all work together to save historic places.
What
Yeah,
you
me
wanna-
too. Yeah, and the sound about your films too. It's
Okay, what you want to do is you want to get me or John DeCure Jr. on, because
Oh,
Oh,
right.
yeah. Oh,
You
my
gave me his
God.
name.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Oh, he's brilliant. He's brilliant.
Well,
I'm a big fan.
I introduced Christine to him on through
Okay.
email.
Well, very
Anyway,
Thank
cool.
you.
it's been a pleasure meeting all of you. I think what you're doing is fascinating. I'm thrilled that I did this because I'm less terrified. And I wish you all a good night.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Tom.
Thank you,
Thank
Tom.
you, Tom. John, do you
Thank
want to
you.
wrap it up?
Yeah, we had more questions than we could handle, so please do email Chris and I with your additional questions, and we'll do what we can to answer them. But I also typed in the chat box a link to our evaluation form, so don't forget to leave your feedback about today's program. I'm sure Chris would love to hear what you thought of it.
Yeah, because I couldn't read any of the comments. I was just like worried about my microphone and everything and getting through my slides. But I'd be happy to answer more questions. I can type my address in the chat, and you're welcome to write to me. And what are we, .org?
Yes, .org.
There we go. So Chris at californiapreservation.org. Feel free to write to me and John, and I'll answer any questions you have. And if you have any hints about some of these sort of Hollywood mysteries, it's always good to find out the backstory. So I want to thank our Tom and Steve again for sharing their expertise with us and their evening, and also really all of you. It's been I know I speak for John as well. We've been just so I have so much gratitude for all of you for joining us for our summertime series of webinars. And John and I have had a really great time hosting you, right, John?
Oh, absolutely. And don't forget to donate to CPF or become a member. Your support really makes these things happen. So our gratitude is endless. And as Chris says, if you want to see more programs, you have to help support us.
Yeah, help support us. But we also are working on, to be released soon, a whole new fall program slate that we're working on. I think you'll be very excited to join that as well. And thank you again, everybody, and have a good evening. Right, John?
Yeah, and you're probably bedtime for you. Good night.
I know, me. Okay, good night, everybody.